So the recent April 6th update happened. We've had our time to digest all the Techter changes, and now it's time to discuss. I'm going to try and make this brief, but I am going to break it down into three parts: the good, the bad, and the things that have me concerned for the future. Quick heads up, this will be a talking head video, so if you want to look at something else while you're listening, go for it. Starting with the good, compound techniques. Now this is pretty obvious because compound techniques equal damage. And one of the things that Techter really needs in its kit is a more consistent and enhanced damage or power curve. The great thing about it, they do great down damage. Granted, some of their animations aren't as attractive, but once again, their damage is pretty good. Now I will say, and we'll get this into another section, that there are some concerns that I have with these compact techniques just because of how it interacts with other classes and some other things going on, but I'll save that for the next section. Overall, definitely a plus. When we're thinking about using them, because I know there's some chatter on Discord and maybe even Reddit, a lot of people opting to just use Fomelion because when they look at the damage numbers, 1800, you can't beat that potency. I do want people to be careful that you are sacrificing down accumulation, which I will say is very, very important just for your power curves and when you can have a down occur or the frequency of a down happening, but also because for anyone looking at the frame data, these compound techniques are somewhat misleading when you think about the other thing that they provide, which is their element mechanic. So when you look at the potency, you look at the frame data, think about the other combos that you can do after that compound technique has occurred. So I know a lot of people are doing off element. Me personally, I'm not seeing a lot of value in that. Now there might be situations just because you need potency, but all in all, I think when you're doing compound techniques outside of certain situations, you want to stick with the element. And of course, there is no element weakness, but still when we're causing those elemental downs, I think that is something that we want to be very cognizant of when we're making these type of decisions. And now let's move on to jet boots, the elephant in the room. For those who don't know, and of those who've probably seen my videos, they got a new photon art called Surging Impulse. And I discussed this a little bit in my previous videos. I wrote about it. This photon art is bloated. And what I mean by that is that it is loaded with a lot of different things that are great, don't get me wrong, but when you really think about it from a design standpoint, it does scratch my head. Why I scratch my head on this is because Bouncer has a class skill that allows him to track. Granted, it is clunky, but after you cast the technique, if you have the skill, you'd flash purple, you'd press the normal attack, and you would chase whatever target that you're locked onto. That class skill does not compare to this photon art. So that in of itself is interesting. Then we get on to the other variation when you hold the photon art. Now this one gives you damage over time, a spinning blade. If you've seen my videos, you know how that works. What is that blade doing? And of course it follows you for those who might not be familiar. It is doing damage over time. It is applying Bouncer's element explosion mechanic like its other PAs. It's providing element down and it's providing overall DPS increases because remember it's passive, and that's one of the benefits of using it with Techter is that I can be whacking with wand and still getting that passive DPS. So when you think about all of that, it's very, very loaded. Did they need it? Probably. But then when we think of Techter, for those who play Techter in PSO2, we had Heavy Hammer. Swift Smash or Rapid Smash, depending on what server you're playing on, is essentially Heavy Hammer without the tracking. And so that's where I start scratching my head because there's a lot more reliance for Techter on Bouncer. When we first saw the damage numbers for Swift Smash, we saw the compound techniques, it was like, okay, maybe we can get away from Bouncer because there's a lot of Bouncer controversy. I know Bouncer mains out there really are not liking that their weapon, specifically jet boots, is essentially being hoarded by both Techter and Force. And so if you think about the market, trying to get a good fix a 3, fix a 4, fix a 5 jet boot, that price is skyrocketing because 3 classes are essentially fighting it. So it's very interesting that they decided to push more power into Bouncer and not actually spread it out against Techter. There's no power that needs to be spread out against Force, but just calling that out. So it's very, very interesting of how this skill, this photon art has come to be. All right, so Swift Smash. In a nutshell, it's good. Is it great? No. But anytime Techter gets a buff, especially in the current state of the game, it's always going to be a thumbs up. I will say, and this is also going to be a bit controversial because I don't really believe this, but in the context of how things are panning out, it wasn't enough. Now, this is similar to Heavy Hammer in PSO2 base, but it is not Heavy Hammer. And one of the benefits of Heavy Hammer, even though it was also a okay skill in the grand scheme of things for PSO2, was that when you pre-charged it, it had 3 levels of charge, or 2 levels of charge technically, and it does massive damage. Swift Smash or Rapid Smash is not that skill. And when you look at it from the DPS tables, with the buff, it is Techter's strongest attack outside of wand counter or step attack dodge. But we'll just say, hey, this from a PA standpoint, it is the strongest attack. But it doesn't measure up to the other abilities, especially when every other class, all of their photon arts were buffed. And I'm gonna target Hunter just because giving the use of Hunter Revenge, where it increases the photon arts power by 50%, even though yes, you can pre-charge this, it's one of those things where it just doesn't compete with anything else. And the issue, which we're gonna talk about in the next session, is because it doesn't compare with anything else, it doesn't really force you to make a decision. Should I use Rapid Smash over Jet Boot Intensity? And the answer is no. And so once again, it's great, it needed more. I think it needed something to where we look at it and we say, that doesn't make any sense, that seems broken. Why would Sega do that? And they played it safe. I think right now they increased the DPS, not the DPS, the potency from 550 to 680, which puts it at a DPS when you take into account elemental weakness, like 347 DPS, which is nice because before the patch, it was like 291. But we're talking about 347. When you look at other classes, especially for the 130 frames that it takes to charge and release it, it's not enough. I was really hoping for 900 potency. I was hoping for even, really if I wanted to break this thing, 1100. That would be where I say that's the cap. And I base this on just purely the numbers, because if you put it around 900 to 1100 and you can include the element explosion to add on to that, you're looking at 400 DPS. When you look at Jet Boot Intensity, depending on how you set it up, you're looking at 436, I might be a little off on that, to 444. Even with the main class damage bonus of Techter, you're competing with that DPS. Now, of course, Shifta causes some issues to where you're also getting a 5% bonus to Jet Boot Intensity, so that 10% main class bonus doesn't mean as much, but still, it's a great buff. All Techter buffs are great, but not enough. And so now this gets into the bad, and kind of alluded to it and spoiled it a bit if you were listening to the previous section. The bad is actually Force, Bouncer, Compound Techniques, and Jet Boots in general. Now, this is not going to be talking about Force or Bouncer. This is just talking about the problematic influence or impact they currently have on Techter. And so let's start with Force and let's start with Compound Techniques, because this one's a little indirect, and so it's probably not that big of a deal, but given how powerful Forces are, it can lead to some issues for Techter down the road. So let's talk about that. Compound Techniques, as the name implies, is a technique that is built upon with techniques. So the more techniques you cast, the faster your compound gauge will fill. This is where the first issue for Force happens. They are a true caster class. Techter is not. Let's just be honest. Techter can cast techniques, but when we look at our entire skill tree, there is nothing that truly benefits casting. We don't have any PP management other than overemphasis, and that's really for specific situations where you're trying to do a certain thing. And if anyone's seen any Force videos, you'll see when they're casting, when they're doing elemental bullets, their compound gauge is filling much faster than Techter can. Why I see this as a bad is because right now Force is very powerful. And they might be so powerful that Sega might say, hey, we need to pull back on some of this power, or we need to think about this a little more. Now, of course, this is just conjecture. This is nothing that I'm saying is going to happen, but saying imagine that it would. And they pull the power back on compound techniques. It hurts force, yes, but force is super strong right now. I think I saw a video where a force soloed red and purple rank 2 in 18 minutes, and had 2 minutes to spare. But they nerf compound techniques. That is a direct nerf to Techter. And for our power curve, we're essentially resetting the clock back to 0. And so this is one of the big issues I have, is that right now Force and Techter, their skills and kind of their ideology to a certain degree are so tied that if they were to pull down a lever on Force, it's going to pull down a lever on Techter. And so that's why I'm going to put compound techniques and Force as a bad, because we're starting to see that other classes are taking more priority in how we're able to be better techers. And if something were to change with them, it changes with us, and we're essentially not in control of our own destiny. Bouncer and the jet boot, specifically Surging Impulse, is no different. But I would say this one is more direct. Because right now, as I spoke about Surging Impulse, that photon art is bloated. I could easily see changes happening to where maybe it no longer procs things like Barter Block or builds the mechanic. Or maybe they implement the system that they have with Fighters Double Saber Whirlwind, where when you're using it with a multi-weapon that isn't Double Saber, that Whirlwind damage gets cut to 25%. And so once again, jet boots, when it comes to jet boot intensity, the jet sweep jolt, the new Surging Impulse, Sega could do anything to either directly nerf those abilities or at the very least shift it to where being a main bouncer actually gets the benefits and other classes don't, is going to be another detriment to Techter. To simply put, Techter is in a better place because of another class or things that it shares with a class that could be taken advantage of more. And so what happens when Sega says, you know what, let's pull back the reins, you know what, let's give Bouncer more of an identity and not give these tools to other classes, Techter falls back down, and we're already at the bottom. I mean, let's be honest, other than, let's say, Rangers, which is say, they also have their issues, we're at the bottom of the barrel. And while these changes are great, and it's definitely more fun to play Techter, as you've probably seen in my videos, it's not breaking any records. It's not changing anything. And so it's very concerning, and we're going to get into the concern section next, that you could easily flip a switch that's not even a Techter related switch on compound techniques or how they're handling jet boots, and we've lost pretty much everything. We can't use Swift or Rapid Smash and go Te+Hu. The damage just isn't there. And our reliance on compound techniques isn't as strong as Force. Watch a Force video and see how fast they can build that. And then look at Techter. We can't compete with that. And so if you haven't guessed, the things that have me concerned, and that is Techter, the class in of itself. And I'm pretty sure we kind of see the writing on the wall. Right now, any power, and this has actually not been right now, this has actually been probably for the past 6 months, or even since, actually, scratch that. This has been the issue since Bouncer was released. That the only time we got better that really mattered was because we were using the tools of other classes. And I see this as a concern because if this continues to be the situation, I can't really say that we should be using Techter weapons, specifically Wand. Talus, I'm not even going to get into Talus. I even skipped over the Talus buffs because in my opinion, Talus is a force weapon. It's a casting weapon and Force is a caster. Techter is a pseudo caster, but I've already discussed that. It's getting to a point to where using Wand is going to be inefficient. We're essentially reliant on other classes' tools, or we're reliant on things that are shared by other classes, and they do that better. And that can always be problematic because it puts us in a very bad spot. So I wish Sega would just come out with it and say, hey, yeah, we kind of designed Techter to where you can use Wand, but you can also use other classes. I mean, the best example of that is Te+Hu, which is I mean, what am I saying? It's still up there. I'm pretty sure if you're a Techter main out there who has all strike attack or S attack affixes and you're using fighter weapons, I'm not too confident that the current state of Techter Bouncer is actually going to come anywhere close to that. And so this is where things get tricky, because what are the future skills for Techter? Are they going to be kind of more of the same? Or are they going to allow us to open things up so we can use other weapons? The other issue that I have is that other class skills, they're becoming main class. You know, I used to be Techter Hunter and was thinking about actually going with Hunter weapons, and so going S attack, because I'm a partisan main, or at least I was a partisan main. But then what happened? They got the Hunter Revenge Perfect Parry, which is a main class skill only. For those who might not be familiar, when you successfully Hunter Avenge a Photon Art, not only do you get the 50% damage increase, but you also get a pretty good amount of invulnerability frames. So you don't have to worry about follow-up attacks. If you avenge, you're going to do all that damage without being hit. But that is main class only. And so my thought process was, I'm not going to go down that route, because really the power for Hunter Revenge now is that skill. If I don't have to worry about being hit, that increases the value of Avenge or Avenger that much. And if I can't use it, then the value is actually diminished. And so that is my concern, to where we're getting to a point where Techter's skills, even Shifta, which I could have a whole other conversation of why this is even a skill we need to apply. Aside from the skills that kind of don't make any sense. I know Wand Lovers is better, but when we really think about it, it's not giving us enough. You know, in PSO2, it would have been great because we can just hold the button, smash all day, take hits, heal through it. In this game, especially when we look at purple triggers, gigantics, you're not supposed to take hits. And so there's this weird kind of duality of what we're supposed to be and how we take advantage of things. And if Wand doesn't get any real treatment, if we still have to rely on things such as jet boots, but then Sega starts constraining how you can use subclass abilities, that kind of puts us as an odd man out, and it really limits our options. And so while I'm super positive about the updates, this is a concern of just looking at how things are happening. If things don't change, you know, you might have to just put Wand away. And then we're going to have this weird I'm a Techter who's exploiting shift to D-band. What happens if Sega's like, we don't want that? Then what does the class have? And now, I will be honest, I have this perspective from the stance of a solo player. You know, even though I do play in group play, I do like soloing content, or at least trying the solo content when I'm allowed to. Now, if you like playing with your friends, you like playing in your party, a lot of these issues really aren't an issue, because Techter was always S-class in a party. I will say that when you had two Techers in a party, that S-class went to C-class, especially if one or both of those Techers weren't Techter Bouncer. But once again, we've discussed this. That's kind of a problem, that I have to use Bouncer to actually have value outside of just healing people and giving shift to D-band to the party. Now, you can go in, Techter Bouncer, Wand, Jet Boots, and not only contribute like you always have been in the party, but now doing some serious damage, which is going to be noticeable. So in party play, this is great. I personally just don't like if you're going to isolate a class or two, and that's specifically Techter and Ranger, and be like, you're the party classes. If you want a solo content, do these classes. Now, I wouldn't have a problem with that if soloing content for the things that matter, like triggers, wasn't time gated. You know, if they said, hey, just, you know, don't die 5 times and you can clear it, then it wouldn't be a problem. But it's got to be 20 minutes, and that requires damage, that requires tools. And if you're not going to give these classes the tools, what's the point? Because I feel like you're setting a lot of people up for not necessarily failure, but just kind of like, hey, what's going on? Why are these classes getting essentially the weak bullet and the shift attacks? I feel like this game has progressed enough that we can get away from that, giving the self-sufficiency of other classes. And so I want to leave it at that. It's a pretty long video. I appreciate those who stuck around. I'd like to hear your thoughts and your take on things. Of course, June is around the corner. We've got the new region, new content. Who knows what could change? But overall, I think it's a good direction. I just wish that Techter would have more of an identity so that just in case the nerf hammer comes around for force or the nerf hammer comes around for bouncer or changes, at least maybe not nerfs, but substantial changes to how those skills and classes interact with others. It's just something that's got me concerned, and hopefully Sega has a plan and we see that come to fruition in the next 6 months. Other than that, I'll catch you guys next time.